Give your house some. What was that? What did I miss?
Graham's eye roll.
Oh, Graham.
Let's just stop and talk about that for a moment right now, if we could. Anyway, okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. With the legislative session coming to a close today, it's a good time to pause. First, let me say thank you to the MLAs for their contribution to a very productive sitting. Now, obviously, the wildfires in Fort McMurray dominated much of our attention and our focus. They reminded all of us of why we are here, to do the people's business. And when there is a major natural disaster, the people's business is frankly more important than ever. So I want to acknowledge government and opposition MLAs, including the Leader of the Official Opposition, together and staying focused on what mattered when it came to that issue. Now, we do have significant disagreements how to move on the important role of government when it comes to helping our citizens through a crisis. And let me also say that our province's public servants stepped up and did the job that is expected of them in a very difficult time. And I was pleased to be able to offer my thanks to some of those key people earlier this morning. On behalf of all Albertans, I'd like to once again thank them for their hard work and their dedication. Now, when Albertans elected a new government just a little over a year ago, they chose change. And though much work remains on that matter, I'm very proud of the progress that we've been making on delivering on our commitments. This session, at least two fundamental accomplishments stand out. First, the Alberta Jobs Plan, and the decisive action, secondly, that we're taking at long last to deal with the threat that climate change poses to our province and, frankly, to our world. So let me start with climate change. For far too long, past governments chose the path of denial and delay. It got us nowhere. Alberta was vilified internationally. Our products remain landlocked. More dangerous pollution was pumped into our air, and nothing or very little was done to diversify our economy or our markets. Climate change denial was and remains a dead end for Alberta. Today, there is a broad consensus among scientists and across the political spectrum, including thoughtful conservatives, that climate change is real and that we must step up to deal with it. The Climate Change Leadership Plan that our government announced last fall and the legislation introduced this session powerfully reflects the importance that Albertans place on this issue. Industry, First Nations, environmental and community leaders are standing together with one shared aim: to take Alberta's place as a world leader in the low-carbon future that is coming. And so I'm very proud of our Climate Leadership Plan. It is the single most important step any government in Canada has taken to address climate change thus far. And for Albertans, it will make a big difference in their lives. The carbon levy will be reinvested into our economy, and 6 in 10 Albertans will receive a full rebate. The Climate Leadership Plan means our air will be cleaner because we are phasing out coal. Our commutes will be shorter because we are investing in new green infrastructure like public transit. And our children will have more opportunities because we are growing renewable energy, advancing new technologies, and getting more value and jobs from our resources, the kind of jobs that our kids need to build their futures here at home. Now, supporting and creating jobs was the centerpiece of the budget, the Alberta Jobs Plan, that our government tabled in April. The Alberta Jobs Plan builds on our province's greatest strength, our people. Faced with the collapse in oil prices, the plan rejects the idea of deep cuts that would only make a tough situation worse. Because you don't deal with unemployment by throwing more people out of work. You don't give people the skills they need to succeed by slashing budgets for education and making it hard. Don't look unemployed workers in the eye and say, tough luck, you're on your own. It's not the way we do things in Alberta. The Alberta Jobs Plan instead supports with a new chunk-making initiative to fight poverty and ensure that families get the support they need. 80,000 children will benefit. The Alberta Jobs Plan supports business and entrepreneurs with a small business tax cut, access to new capital, and tax. The Alberta Jobs Plan diversifies our economy through initiatives like the Petrochemical Diversification Fund that will create thousands of new jobs by getting more value out of our resources. And the Alberta Jobs Plan invests in schools, hospitals, roads, and transit, putting Albertans to work today and laying the groundwork for economic recovery. So the climate leadership and the Alberta Jobs Plan of this government that go to the heart of the kind of Alberta that we all want for our families and our communities. Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together. The fires in Fort McMurray were a powerful reminder of that simple truth. We share common hopes and dreams for Alberta. An Alberta where every child gets a good start in life and has the opportunity to realize their dreams. An Alberta where our air and our water and our land are clean and we are doing our part to address climate change. An Alberta where working people are respected and listened to. An Alberta that looks out for all its citizens, particularly when times are tough. A more prosperous and a more caring Alberta that looks to the future with hope and optimism. That's the Alberta that our government is working for. And in this legislative session, I am very proud of the work that our government and our caucus, more, I would say, venture to say, in the last 4 months than the previous government got done in the last 6 years. Over the summer, my government will stay hard at work, reaching out to Albertans, delivering forward-looking progressive government that focuses on what matters. So thank you for listening to my comments, and I'd like to pass the mic over to my colleague and Government House Leader, Brian Mason.
Thanks very much, Premier. Yes, I believe that this legislative sitting was very productive for the people of Alberta. And let me say there were important moments when the government and opposition acted together to pass private members' bills like those helping in the fight against fentanyl and increasing awareness about post-traumatic stress disorder. But this legislative sitting also highlighted something else that is notable in a position. On the one hand, the opposition parties by going after frontline healthcare and education with deep cuts. The opposition parties want to download the costs of deficits onto average families, bring back an unfair tax system that rewards the wealthy and punishes the middle class, and turn their is this. When they were in government, they didn't diversify the defend Alberta's, nor did they get access to Tidewater. When they were in government, they didn't prepare the province for an economic downturn, and they completely lost touch with Albertans. Isn't being fixed quickly enough for them. They think that they should be put back in power. In sum total, they turned back that they left Albertans. This was reflected in the legislative leadership and the Alberta Jobs Plan. We also took action to end predatory lending practices, to reform agencies' relationship, rewrote a central ruling, modernize security rules and harmonize them with national standards, enforcement rules for minor offences. Took action to the rest of Indigenous communities, repealed Bill 22. Our government also put forward a motion in the House on medical assistance in dying. Outside of Quebec, we are the only province where all legislators have had the opportunity to provide feedback on this important and deeply personal issue. The legislative agenda was very ambitious, but I'm pleased we moved through it in a timely and efficient manner. We are working on behalf of Albertans, and I think there too is a stark contrast in approach with that of the opposition. Their behaviour during Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne's visit to the legislature marked a low point that I hope we never see again. And it could have done seem as though they're working, apologized, and I take them at their word. But I think their behaviour this session are focused on infighting than on people we're all. The Wild Rose failed that very basic test of leadership this sitting. And it leaves us asking, if they can't do their job in opposition, they do it as government. They're just not up to the job. Let me finally say that I'm very proud of our caucus. They are an extremely diverse, talented, and committed team focused every day on serving their constituents. We demonstrated the kind of hardworking, nose to the grindstone, drama-free approach that Albertans expect from their government. We came into the session with some very important work to do. We got down to business, and we kept moving Alberta forward.
Because you know how many years in opposition, and then today you're sitting on the front bench and you actually passed this legislation. What was that? Because I noticed you were shaking hands. First thing you did.
Well, I mean, I think, we've obviously passed a fair amount of legislation at this point. But the climate change leadership plan is one that it's a very ambitious policy piece. And it was a challenging piece. We promised we would act on it, to a timeline that we promised we would, and then to move forward and still meet that timeline. We have an ambitious amount of work that needs to be done. And so I was very pleased that we were able to get it through the House, as Brian said, in a drama-free way. We were, our caucus stood up and said, we're going to put the time in and we'll be here as long as it takes. We didn't have to have, all these sort of heavy-handed approaches that sometimes become necessary. We just did our work and moved forward on it. And so I was just very proud. I was proud of the fact that we got this piece of legislation through, and I was proud of the way we got it through. And so I was very great. Brian and I started out back in 2008, just the two of us, and it was kind of cool to be there beside each other as we saw something like this forward. I mean, I'm very proud of a lot of the things our government's done, but certainly the fact that the session ended on this one was a high point.
Premier, why was the government not open to any of the amendments on the climate change bill? I mean, especially the ones about accountability measures, performance measures within the bill.
Well, because we put a lot of work into drafting this legislation. We put a lot of work into the consultation. There's also a number of accountability measures that already exist in other pieces of the legislation. And so we thought this through. There are accountability measures within the legislation. The legislation itself includes a provision that is redirected to very specific programs around the issue of promoting the objectives of the climate change leadership plan. So I actually think that there is already high levels of accountability in this, and that
working.
There's a lot of work that and the speed of the energy efficiency mechanisms, also in terms of the impact on oil and gas emissions and methane, and then also trying to factor out what's happening vis-a-vis the rest of the economy as a whole in terms of the slowdown. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So we will certainly be measuring it throughout. As you know, generally speaking, the plan anticipates bending the curve down and then ultimately seeing real-time emissions reductions down the road, more after 10 years. Indeed it is, but what we have to compare this to is what the projection was. And so that, in my view, is still very, very significant. And you can't, we're a big province and a big economy, and you can't turn it on a dime. You have to balance best evidence and best practice and economic security and certainty, and working with your partners against the desire to see those changes right away. But what we have in place is a very clear plan and a pathway that businesses and stakeholders can see and plan along. And that's what is going to get us to those objectives, and they're real objectives. Rather than making plans in this province where it was clear as minute they came out, they were based on the projected pretend outcomes of CCS, for instance, that we knew there was no economic case for people to actually adopt. What we've done is we've put in a very prudent set of projections around the reductions in emissions. It may end up ultimately being faster, but at the same time, it's a significant drop of where it would have been, and in the long term, you'll see emissions drop significantly.
And in a sense, like, you got an election in 3 years, unless you've changed your plans on that. Will people see something change between now and then? Like in a very practical, political, pragmatic way?
Well, they definitely will, because by then you'll have seen the work of the Energy Efficiency Agency really start to make a difference in people's lives in terms of the availability and the accessibility of respect to efficiency measures and reducing the way in which they travel around. You'll see investments in public transit. You'll see that big efficiency piece, because that's sort of the, not to overuse it, hanging fruit, particularly in Alberta's emissions profile. We had, even factoring out the oil sands, we had the highest per capita emissions profile in the country, at the same time paired with no efficiency strategy. So what we have is an efficiency strategy that will be robustly funded, that will be able to work very quickly with Albertans to promote the kinds of changes that bring about results quite quickly. Meanwhile, we'll be working with industry on the methane plan, so that's very significant. We're going to see measurable changes definitely in that process between now and 2019, and then we'll be also working in terms of trying to promote the presence of renewable energy as a portion of our electricity generation system.
To make sure, because you've given an estimate on what this will cost the average family. What are you going to do to monitor that, and what are you going to do if you're wrong, if you're too low, and it's actually there's things you hadn't anticipated, and it's going to cost you
I can't. I'm not going to hypothesize over things that have not happened. I mean, we go on the basis of the best evidence that we have available, and the best evidence that we have available is the projections that we have with respect to the cost now, and that's what our plan is geared to adjust for. And we made very clear policy decisions that low and middle income families would see most of the rebate coming back, because we also know that higher income families have the flexibility to make the behavior changes that will reduce their emissions more quickly. So that's the general principle. We'll watch this. One of the things that we're going to have to be keeping an eye out over the next 8 to 12 months is what decisions are made by other jurisdictions continentally and nationally with respect to pricing carbon. So things will change, but our plan is designed to stand on its own and to be on its own. But conversely, we may see things happen even faster if other plans come online.
Premier, what was the low point for you of this session? You mentioned about Wild Rose heckling Kathleen Wynne. What was your personal low point?
Certainly there's no question that the response of some members of our assembly to a visiting premier from another jurisdiction was not exactly a moment of pride for me in terms of my relationship with that premier, or with respect to any premiers. It was also frustrating, of course, because we know that Ontario is an important ally that we need to work with, both on the climate change file as well as the energy diversification, the market diversification file, and pipelines. And so it wasn't helpful for the display that she observed. Now, I think she'll probably be just fine with it. I've reached out to her office later that afternoon, and she's a grown-up. But honestly, we're working really hard to change the reputation of Alberta nationally, and I actually think we're making great progress. But we certainly did not make great progress in terms of changing the reputation of our assembly that day.
When you're talking about pipelines, Mayors Nenshi and Robertson are engaging in a bit of a war of words right now. What's your reaction to that, and what do you think that will do when it comes to the chances of Kinder Morgan actually being built?
Well, I think, first of all, that both of our mayors, both Nenshi and Iveson, are doing a very good job representing the interests of Alberta in terms of the conversations with their colleagues across the country, and I support them in that. I also, our government has already made a pretty strong case for the merits that we see for Kinder Morgan, and from my perspective as a premier, I'm simply going to say that I think the merits outweigh the arguments against it. But that being said, every community needs to be heard, and those issues away. We need to ensure investments are establish greater levels of comfort in the impacted communities, while at the same time understanding the significant contribution that a pipeline to Tidewater will make not only to the Alberta economy, but also to the national economy, and understanding that the reason this matter rests with a federal agency and ultimately with the federal cabinet is because we are looking at the best interests of Canadians overall.
Take Laura's question. Do you have a question? And then we'll go to the phones.
We understand that the government has hired a third party to review the handling of the Fort McMurray fires. The information came yesterday in an interview with Shane Schreiber, and we were just wondering what was behind that decision.
Well, I'm not specifically aware of that. I suspect, but I do know that in general, it's always the case that what we do is we always do an evaluation of best practice when we go through one of these situations to see where we could improve. And I will say that every time that has happened, it's resulted in more improvements. So for instance, I think that our emergency response to this fire was informed by what we learned both from Slave Lake as well as from the Southern Alberta floods, and so I suspect this is just a matter of good best practice internal to the work of the emergency agency, always trying to ensure what could we do better, what gaps could we ensure we fill faster next time. Not to say that it's over, because although, as I've said today in the House, the emergency response portion of supporting Fort McMurray is starting to fade down. You know, we moved from the 4 to the 3 at the POC in terms of the emergency level, but the work of supporting the residents of Fort McMurray continues to be critically important and will not be over in the short term. And we know there's still a great deal of work that the government needs to do, both on a provincial level as well as municipal and ultimately federal as well.
Or I can follow up with you if you're looking for more info. We're going to go to the phones now. Operator, please put through the first caller.
The first question comes from the line of Lucas Meyer from 660 News. Your line is open.
Well, thank you very much for taking my question, Premier, and thank you also to the press corps on their work this session. Premier, what are at the top of your priority list? What will be the most work you'll be doing this summer, and as well over the summer?
Number of ongoing issues that need to be addressed in the a key focus for me and for the Fort McMurray Task Force, and so we'll be moving forward on that, as well promoting the Kinder Morgan deliberations. We'll be doing work on that. I'll be meeting with the group that has been the federal appointees to that within a couple of weeks. We'll also, of course, be keeping an eye on moving forward with respect to the various elements of the climate change leadership plan, and then as well we brought in legislation with respect to agencies, boards, and commissions, and in particular the compensation scheme. And as you all know, the Sunshine List will be coming out within a couple of weeks, and I think at that point people will understand the import of that legislation and why we needed it, and then we'll be continuing to move forward with that as well. So those are a few things, and I'm probably not even focusing on all of them. Of course, it's the summer, and one hopes to have that opportunity to get out and meet a little bit more with Albertans in their communities when we're not actually in the House.
Operator, please put through the next caller.
The next question comes from the line of James Wood from the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. Thanks for taking the questions. I actually have two questions. The first one I would like to ask you, the government has been fairly cagey about the financial impact of the fire. Can you give any more of a concrete sense of the financial impact of the fire and how that will impact government operations and the financial picture moving forward?
Well, certainly what we are doing is what we are working to do is ensure that the information that we put out is accurate. So it's really important that we have it all in front of us before we put it out. And so we've been careful in evaluating the scope of the damage and also in evaluating the sources for recovery. So and so we're still in that process. We certainly know right now that we've lost on average 1 million barrels of oil a day in the month of May, and we expect that most of June that will average out down to about 500,000 a day for June, and then we are hoping that we'll see oil production resume its normal levels by July. And so there are certainly implications as a result of that. It's still a matter. We're going to be meeting with to discuss in more detail the terms and conditions around the disaster relief funding model. And that will have implications for how much of that comes out of the provincial coffers, both in the short and the medium and the long term. And then again, we're working with insurance companies to determine the scope of their coverage. So it really is a question of determining how the recovery proceeds and what the issues are going forward. So, even the insurance industry is reluctant, and they've got a much more defined set of compensatory obligations, and they're reluctant to come up with a number yet. And so we know it will be significant, but we're going to wait and see ultimately what the numbers are from all these different factors that I just outlined before we come up with a number.
Did you have a follow-up, James?
Yeah, if I could just ask you, following up on you made reference to Kinder Morgan as one of your priorities. Is what we're seeing from Mayor Robertson and the First Nations groups, and we've seen this in a lot of pipeline opposition, is the opposition is centered more about the impact of the line itself and concern about spills as opposed to emissions as the primary concern. Do you think Alberta has any kind of role to play in trying to address those issues moving forward to try and lessen some of the opposition to pipeline projects?
Well, as an advocate, I think we have a role. I don't know that we have a role in terms of marine cleanup, but certainly we've supported the position of both the communities and the province of BC with the federal government on the need to strengthen marine cleanup investments in the harbour to provide a greater level of comfort to them. And certainly with respect to, pipeline management, I think that, quite frankly, there's a fairly good record. It's not perfect, but there's a fairly good record with Kinder Morgan. And so we certainly support the concerns of communities. If they have specific recommendations around how pipeline safety can be enhanced, then we would support that as well. But I do think it helps us in the conversation overall to be able to say, listen, that product that is coming down the pipe is subject to an emissions cap. And so the nature of what comes down that pipe is going to change. And quite frankly, our ability to succeed and to fund this pretty significant transition in the province of Alberta, which does drive a notable proportion of Canada's overall greenhouse emissions, requires to some extent that we get the best price that we can for the products that we have and in the economy that we have. And so allowing or forcing Alberta to continue to have this incredibly willing to do our best to reduce our emissions in a way that helps helpful argument in some quarters, not all, but certainly in some in BC. And then, of course, ultimately, there's still the arguments about jobs. And the fact of the matter is, left or right, the people of BC care about jobs, and they know that a lot of folks in BC actually find their employment in Alberta's oil patch, and so we know that we need to keep an eye on that.
We're going to take one more caller from the phone, and then I'll come back to Quinn before we wrap up. Operator, please put through the next caller.
The next question comes from the line of Don Braid from the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Premier, it wasn't much more than a year ago that ex-Premier Jim Prentice was being vilified for reducing the tax rate for charitable donations, the tax credit for charitable donations. Now, you've just brought in a carbon tax bill that doesn't exempt charitable donations or nonprofits at all. And I seem to remember you being critical of that, Premier, back then. There's been a lot of concern among the charitable nonprofits for having a hard time anyway because of the economy. Wondering why you decided not to give them any kind of break on this.
Well, first of all, in the course, through our rebate and through the energy efficiency rise, through the Energy Efficiency Agency, there will be the opportunity to work with charitable organizations and help them reduce the cost of the carbon levy that they would be paying. So that's the first thing. The second is that I think it needs to be remembered that in many ways we've already supported a number of charitable organizations, not all, but for instance, when you look at the increase in what the heck was it called? The municipal funding piece there that we increased the first time in 20 years to a number of nonprofits that provide social service supports. And then as well, through the work that we've done by simply maintaining public services and public service levels. Quite honestly, there's actually been a lot of partnership with a number of different charities throughout the province, and we'll continue to work with them as we roll out the climate change plan. The fact of the matter is that a climate change policy will not work if you immediately begin to carve everybody out of it. And quite frankly, the opposition is making an argument that they want to carve practically everybody out of it so that it's not applicable. And frankly, that's not the way you bring about that kind of change.
Did you have a follow-up?
Thank you. If I could just ask one more thing. Calgary in the last few days as people begin to get their final property tax bills. And one major reason for the size of some of these bills, which in at least one case is actually causing a business to close up, is the government's move on education property tax, which has made the blended rate down here 6.1% overall. Your take being over 10. I wonder what you would say about that difficulty.
Well, as I've said a number of times on that issue, Don, first of all, we ran on a platform of maintaining stable, predictable education funding, which included 2% increase plus funding the rate of growth. Property tax formula has been in place since 2013, and we did not change that. In fact, overall, across the province, we've seen the overall mill rate go down, but it doesn't have the same impact on each jurisdiction. It depends on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis how they assess their taxes. But the fact of the matter here is that the education funding issue or the percentage of education taxing issue, and so this is a result of the whole system coming together. And but it is. There's no change that people didn't know very clearly during the election that we would make. And there was no change to the calculation made by this government. You know, it is what it is, and stability of our education funding and our education system that it supports.
Take Quinn and then Graham, and then we'll wrap up.
Minister Mason, you said about 1 year ago, that you'd be reviewing ATV legislation. We had an incident on the weekend where a 14-year-old was actually killed. When will we that review?
Forward at the fall sitting of the legislature. We're working on it now. We're wrapping up our consultation. I mean, there's a number of for example, do you require helmets on ATVs used at what about mention that there will be helmet legislation for ATVs this fall?
I have a question and a follow-up. On the Bill 20 debate, on the surface it's a debate about Bill 20, but are we still in a sense debating in Alberta the reality of climate change? Something that you saw coming out in the debate.
And you know, one of the Wild Rose MLAs made the can't in the same, you know, basket, that there's some stand that climate, it needs to be dealt with, and that it's human caused. But there are many others that apparently that are either agnostic in the fact that they're terms of this very important issue. And I think Mr. Clark was making this point today. Even his little party was able to come up with some policy with respect to that, and we have absolutely nothing from the Wild Rose, which indicates to me that they want us to roll back the carbon levy. They want us not to impose categories of people, and basically it means, in my view, almost you know, secondary. The reality is that they are not interested in taking action on it.
Follow-up, Graham?
What are your plans this summer now? Like the government, fine, the session's now behind us. Moving forward, what are the government's goals? What are your plans this summer?
Well, as I said, we have a number of matters that are before us. There's a lot of work still for McMurray. As I said, we need to, there's a lot of work going forward in terms of implementing pieces of the Climate Change Act, as well as the agency boards and commissions review. There is work going forward, as I said, with respect to Kinder Morgan. I'm going to be meeting with the NEB or the post-NEB panel of the federal government a week after next, and then also sitting down and looking at and evaluating how is our jobs plan working. We still have to move forward with our economic diversification panel. So there's a very long list of items that we will be working on over the summer, and then, as I said, also attempting to get out and about a little bit more to meet with with Albertans and see what they have to say to us on how things have been going so far. So it's a busy summer, but you know, one where I feel confident going out there based on the record that we've established in this session. I think it's very possible, you know, there's certainly Albertans out there that still disagree with us, but I don't think there should be that many more who question whether we're up for the job.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.